listening to the Mark Petroni radio program, heard exclusively on News Talk Saga 960.
We're back with more News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petroni Show, the day of the midterm elections in the United States. And that's why it's such a pleasure to have Miles Christen on the show, coming to us from southern Wisconsin, the Madison area. Wisconsin, of course, one of the battleground states, one of those that is expected, certainly, if you're talking about the gubernatorial race, you're talking about the Senate races. Let's get a rundown by Miles now. Talk a little bit about what's going on in Wisconsin.
Well, very similar to Pennsylvania. Both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are running their lieutenant governors for the Senate. And in my state, there's a guy by the name of Mandela Barnes, and I think he's not just a terrible candidate, I think he's a terrible person. I've talked about it several times. I had an incident with him about 7 years ago where I asked him about his voting record, and he physically pushed me. Luckily, I got the CCTV footage from the police. And there was a primary with about 20 candidates, some of them who are extremely qualified, including a 30-year combat veteran with a PhD who works for the Milwaukee Area Technical College, who oversaw the state emergency management, many different extremely qualified candidates. But the media handpicked about 4 or 5 of them who had the most amount of money and clout. And there was also this Marquette poll saying that Barnes would do so much better than Ron Johnson, or that he would defeat Ron Johnson. And now it looks like Ron Johnson might very likely get reelected. And so there's just like this weird sort of influence that goes on in Wisconsin before a primary is even done. A handful of consultants and people, behind the curtain, basically.
Yeah, okay, so that's what's going on in Wisconsin. Tony Evers is the incumbent governor. Do you think he'll get back in?
That is a good question. It's very slim. I think Tony will just get through because Michaels is disliked by some conservatives. He is this multimillionaire who, he ran for U.S. Senate about 18 years ago or 16 years ago against Russ Feingold. And about 18 years ago, he ran for U.S. Senate and lost. And then he went back to New York and Connecticut and has not been involved in Wisconsin politics for this whole time. And then he popped back in this year. And he likes to tote his military record. But I know veterans who say, well, he actually never served overseas. He was stationed in D.C. the whole time. And so I know a lot of conservatives that aren't happy with Michaels. And also some of Michaels' views are so over the top that I think Michaels might not be elected governor, but at the same time, he's got a real chance of possibly winning it.
All right. What about across the country now? I mean, you obviously are living in Wisconsin. Lots of talk about a red wave. Some are talking about a red tsunami. A lot of people talking about, for instance, African-American voters. A lot of them support the Democrats, maybe might stay home or even vote Republican this time around. Hispanic votes reaching historic highs for the Republican Party, and not just in areas like Miami-Dade, where it looks like Marco Rubio now was in a dogfight but no longer is, and now should win handily over there. Go ahead.
The Democrats have always played this game of telling people of color, oh, vote for us and we'll do better for you. And then when we had the first African-American president in this country, he was beholden to Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, and he did very little for people of color. And whether you like Trump or not, you can't deny that he invested lots of money into the inner cities and into black colleges and so forth. And also, I don't think the Democrats understand parts of their agenda that they've been pushing, like defund the police. Well, it turns out actually majority of black people don't support the defund the police because it worsens their communities. Or, there's the Democrats have also been taking really strange stances on really strange, fringe issues that not everybody agrees with. And, I think there's great reason to think that the Democrats aren't going to get the support they're thinking they're going to get.
Well, I'm not even sure that they think they're going to get much support. I mean, you're looking at inflation is running very hot, taking a bite out of Americans' pocketbooks. You're looking at crime. I mean, you and I have spoken about the crime rates just going on in nearby Madison, in places like Milwaukee. Certainly, Chicago's world-renowned now for shootings. Now, black-on-black crime in particular.
There's been a lot of talk about, the hundreds of homicides that have happened in Milwaukee over the last year. There's also a lot of homicides, a lot of robberies, a lot of crime going on in places like Madison. And the Democrats have just ignored crime so much. And there's so many mistakes that they made over the last couple of years that are, I think, coming back to bite them, between the riots of 2020 and this crime that's just getting out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the border? Is that an issue at all? I mean, the 5 million people that have crossed the border in the last couple of years. Yeah, go ahead.
I like many people, believe in a immigration policy that would bring people in because we need people to fill jobs. And I think, basic background checks and basic requirements make sense. And I think even a lot of conservatives probably take that stance if they want people to come through what they consider to be the legal method, and there's whatever debate could be had about what should be the requirements to come here. But the Democrats don't even take a real stance on immigration. They haven't addressed the issue. That at one point Biden said Kamala was going to handle it, and she's done nothing with it. The Democrats have ignored so many issues, and I think they're even going to lose possibly one congressional seat here in Wisconsin. So there's a very real possibility that the Republicans could gain the U.S. House and Senate. And then on top of that, in places like Wisconsin, there's a lot of seats that we don't talk about, like Attorney General and Secretary of State or Treasurer. And I could see those ones also possibly flipping red.
Right. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the sentiment amongst Democrats. I mean, a lot of people who support the Democrat Party. I mean, what's their mentality going in? Are they thinking maybe I'll sit this one out, that maybe the party needs some big changes? I see Jack Posobiec now tweeting about how Nancy Pelosi is going to be the next ambassador to Italy. So, I mean, is there a sense amongst Democrats that maybe there needs to be a period of soul searching for the Democrat Party?
Well, I know a lot of people who, for instance, I worked with, a decade ago when we had a large issues about union rights and so forth, or people that, I've known for 15, 20 years who are very opposed to things like the Iraq War. And, these are old school liberals, and they're saying, what the heck is going on with the party, where it's just, we're all blown away by the fact that after the repeal of Roe versus Wade, you would think that the Democrats would be doing really good in this election, that they should have an easy ride through this election, and they have managed to put up the worst candidates, and they have managed to screw up this election so badly. I mean, me and a older friend were talking about it a few weeks ago, like, wow, this looks like it could be a huge red wave. And then over the last couple of weeks, we started to see mainstream Democrats talk about how they were in trouble, and that this might be a lot like the 2010 election, where the Democrats lost the U.S. House. In Wisconsin, they lost the state House, the state Senate, a few congressional seats, the governor's mansion or governor's office, so forth. I mean, 2010, the Republicans and the Tea Party wave took everything. And we might very well be looking at something like that all over again. And it's because the primaries are run by a handful of consultants, a handful of media people who pre-pick the candidates before the primaries are even done. So then the Democrats end up with these really bad candidates. And I mean, it's literally, I can look at photos and you can tell there is the exact same consultants in the backgrounds of these politicians in all of these failed elections that we've had over many years here in Wisconsin.
All right, what about Biden? I mean, what happens to him, say, assuming that, well, certainly the House appears to be headed to the Republicans, the Senate, quite possibly, it wouldn't be obviously anywhere near the kind of a majority that you would see, but it would be a solid win for the Republicans. I mean, obviously
they can't even send Biden out, to go campaigning. They're sending Obama out.
Yeah,
to
what do you
go
think about
campaigning.
that? Bringing him out, wheeling.
And they waited till.
Yeah, go ahead.
They waited till the last few weeks of the campaign to bring out Obama. I think that's probably because they knew how bad they were doing. If they were smart, if they really thought bringing out Obama would, bring out massive crowds, they should have done it months ago. And actually, you can see it where like they bring out Obama and he's filling up a high school gymnasium, whereas back in 2008 he could have filled a larger sports arena. And even in Pennsylvania, he recently did some event, but you could tell the way that they designed it. They had it where I want to say only half of the sports arena was filled. They like had a weird triangular stage and they had it all centered where like people were on one half of it.
Yeah, well, and meantime, Trump has continued his rallies, and still, as far as I know, big and successful rallies that he's been having in support of MAGA people like Carrie Lake, for instance, who looks like she's going to be the next. I mean, I don't want to speak too soon, but she could very well be the next governor of Arizona.
I think she.
Yeah, I mean, do you anticipate that fraud will play a role here? Many Trump supporters, Republicans think that that's a possibility. Especially now, you hear some rumblings by people like John Fetterman. Well, we won't have a result the day of, and don't worry, we're going to get a lot of votes after that. Mail-in ballots. I mean, this tends to undermine credibility in the whole system. We used to have elections and used to know who won that very night. Now, all of a sudden, somehow you can't do that anymore. Fetterman is a disaster. I mean, how does it? I guess we've lost. We've lost our friend Miles. Let's try to get him back. But my point was the John Fetterman, who looks more like a guy who should be in the basement of his mother's house. John Fetterman. I was just mentioning that, Miles.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on with some of these Democrat candidates? I mean, they don't look very good. They don't sound very good. Have they been scraping the bottom of the barrel here? Go ahead.
Fetterman should have dropped out after he had his heart attack or stroke. It's nothing personal about the guy, but he wasn't in the physical shape to do this, and they should have figured out another Democrat that was a better candidate. Heck, back in late August, early September, when they realized Barnes' poll numbers were actually as bad as they were, they probably should have had him drop out and replace him with a different Democrat. The possibility of fraud exists in any election, especially considering we're talking about it has nothing to necessarily even do with the party or the candidates. It could be an individual on either side. I mean, I believe heavily that the 2000 and 2004 elections were rigged. We had two companies, Diebold and ES&S, controlling something like 80% of the ballot machines in the country. And it turns out the two companies were even the CEOs were brothers or something like that. And so it's weird that, 20 years ago, Democrats used to be concerned about electronic voting machines and the ability to tamper. I mean, there was once an incident where they showed that it was actually so easy to cheat them that a child was able to hack into one of these machines and change votes. And now Republicans are concerned about electronic voting.
Yeah, but now they're being called deniers. So
yeah, and there should be a paper ballot every time. And also, I think people are voting absentee and so forth. I think there's all these absentee ballots that have already been cast, why weren't they counted? I mean, I get you don't disclose it necessarily, but why weren't they counted weeks ago? I think every absentee ballot should be counted and verified and double checked long before this election. So on the day of the election, then you have, every vote that's being cast that day, plus all the absentee ballots. So that's where you could see fraud coming through if somebody were to drop, a couple thousand votes for one way or another. But I think there's only so much a party could cheat. And some think this is going to be a close election. I actually think that in some of the races, I think Mandela Barnes will lose by a lot. I think Evers' election will be a lot closer. And
yeah, well, it could be a blowout. I mean, we'll have to see, obviously, but there's a lot of suspicions that have been raised. And whenever these guys come out and say, well, yeah, we can't figure out the The result now, well, then it just points to shenanigans after the fact.
Oh, and
we saw that in
2020.
I mean, come on. Trump was ahead in Wisconsin the night of, then a day after, 2 days after, all of a sudden the Democrats are winning that state. I mean, give me a break. Something obviously went wrong. I mean, if they have mail-in ballots, then those should have been the first counted, not the last. It doesn't make any sense. So you can't help but think that they've been fishing around for ballots, dead people. But I mean, the thing is, after a while, you run out of dead people to put on the ballot, and so who knows? Maybe the Republicans need to win big enough that a steal is not possible. To your point earlier. Last word to you, Miles. Go ahead.
I guess, never underestimate the Democrats' ability to screw up an election, and I just can't believe that even if they are successful and they win, I just still can't believe that it was this close for them, or they've done so badly.
We'll have to see. Maybe we'll get a chance to chat after it's over. What do you think? Will you come
Indeed.
on afterwards?
Oh, sure.
Perfect. Miles Kristen coming to us from Wisconsin. Thank you so much. Let's take a break. Back with more News Talk Saga 960 on the Mark Petrona Show after this.